So, so once again, we are in Mishkanot Shananim once again. We are learning for the Menucha of Sir Naim Dangur and Sir Moses Montefiore. Hashem, the Ilui of their Neshamot, and we're in their space right now. They're very crucial to our program, so we thank them. And let's do some cancel culture. Let's learn a bit about canceling Tosefet Shvi'it. So the Yerushalmi says the following. Rabbi Kruspi, Hashem, we are on page 5 of Unit 3. Rabbi Kruspi b'Shem Rabbi Yochanan, Rabban Gamliel say, right, and Rabbi Yerushalmi is doesn't bother writing every word, Rabbi Kruspi b'Shem Rabbi Yochanan, and he says something. Rabban Gamliel uvet dino hetiru b'isur shnei prakim harishonim. ביוחנן באי ולא כן תנינן, אין בית דין יכול לבטל דברי בית דין חברו עד שיהיה גדול ממנו בחוכמה ומניין. So, they cancelled שני פרקים הראשונים as in the first 2 periods of time that precede Shemitah. They cancelled the Isur to plow from Pesach or Shavuot and on, and they cancelled Elul and on, right? So Rabbi Yochanan asks, how can they do that? They are smaller, they're lower in the hierarchy of the Batei Din. They can't cancel what was done before them. Rabbi Yacha b'Shem Rabbi Yonatan responds, B'sha'ah she'asru lemikra samchu, b'sha'ah she'etiru lemikra samchu. What do we mean? B'sha'ah she'asru lemikra samchu, b'achari shevakatzir tishbot, b'achari shektziro asur. איזה זה? זה חריש של ערב שביעית שנכנס לשביעית, בקציר שחרישו אסור. איזה זה? זה קציר של שביעית שיוצא למוצאי שביעית. So, we learned this based on Rabbi Akiva, right? בחריש ובקציר תשבות, we mean the חריש going into Shemitah, that's where we know תוספת שביעית from. בשעה שהתירו למקרא סמכו, we have a drasha about a different pasuk. ששת ימים תעבוד ועשית כל מלאכתך. מה ערב שבת בראשית את מותר לעשות מלאכה עד שתשקע החמה, אף ערב שבתות שנים את מותר לעשות מלאכה עד שתשקע החמה. So, the Yerushalmi say originally they learned one pasuk, learned בחריש ובקציר תשבות, and said this implies the obligation to have Tosefet Shvi'it, going into Shvi'it and going out of Shvi'it. What does going out of Shvi'it mean? We discussed already, going into Shvi'it is the main focus here. Beseder. Then they learned a different pasuk, and this is an astonishing pasuk. Just like you have in Parashat Behar, right? In Parashat Behar, in Veikra, Perkaf Hey, right? The Torah says, Shesh shanim tizra sadecha, Shesh shanim tizmor karmecha, v'asafta tevuata. Parallel to that, you have Shesh shanim ta'avod, v'asita kol melachtecha. How much out of the 6 days can be used for Asiyat Melacha? The answer is the entirety of them. So too, when the Torah says, Shesh shanim tizra sadecha v'shesh shanim tizmor karmecha, it means the entirety of the 6 years. Now, you'll all admit that this is a very surprising drasha. So before the surprise, there are a few surprises. But let's first say, what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, the later Beit Din had this drasha. Just as Shesh Shanim Ta'avod means the full 6 days, so too Shesh Shanim Tizra Sadecha means the full 6 years. That's the way the Yerushalmi proposes to cancel the previous limud. Now there are 2 questions. We'll ask the smaller one first. I'll mention both of them now. The greater question is, what does Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't understand. Originally, you say there's a din of Tosefet Shvi'it, right? Then you canceled it. But wait, you can't cancel it because there was a greater Beit Din that instituted that Isur, that learned the pasuk in such a way. You can't come as a lesser Beit Din, lower in the hierarchy, and change that halacha. So what's the answer? The first Beit Din had one drasha, the second Beit Din had another drasha. It's a bit surprising, right? It's very surprising, in fact. We'll see an answer to that shortly. But before we say that, I want to go to the smaller issue. The smaller issue is what do we learn from here? How many days of the week are you allowed to do Melacha Zev?
6 days.
6 full days?
Except for Tosefet Shabbat.
Except Tosefet Shabbat. So l'chora, this would be the worst source for this limud, right? Because what happened to Tosefet Shabbat? This whole story started from Tosefet Shabbat, right? Tosefet Yom Kippur. Okay, so I want to briefly go over 3 answers. Answer number 1, remember we learned in the previous unit that the limud either is learned from Shemitah or from Tosefet Yom Kippur. I showed that the Rambam holds that Tosefet D'Oraita is only in Shemitah and Tosefet Yom Kippur. So if Tosefet Shabbat, right, Ilan? Ilan's taking the test on this Bezrat Hashem soon. So, right, the Rambam seems to hold that Tosefet Shabbat only happens, Tosefet of Shabbatot Ve'yom Tovim is only Tosefet Yom Kippur and Tosefet Shvi'it. There's no Tosefet Shabbat D'Oraita. So if we say there's no Tosefet Shabbat D'Oraita, that fits this opinion that says Shesh Yom Ta'avot, meaning the full 6 days, right? That's number 1. Number 2, Ilan will tell you, Ilan who's previously learned Unit 27 in Ilchot Shabbat will tell you that according to Tosfot and the Rush, why do we keep Tosefet Shabbat? There's not the test yet, Ilan. Why do we keep? What do we mean when you say Tosefet Shabbat? According to the Tosfot and the Rush, what we mean is you have to make sure not to mechalel Shabbat. Meaning, do you have to add any actual time from Friday? No. You just have to add how much time? As much time as you'll know for a fact that you're not transgressing Shabbat. So you have to stop any time before Shkia. What's any time before Shkia? Any time before Shkia. Now we're human, unfortunately. So you'll have to take a few minutes. B'seder gamur, right? Wait, I'm going to ask Zev what he means in a moment, but so according to the first opinion, right, so answer number 1 is maybe there's no Tosefet Shabbat at all, D'Oraita, only D'Rabbanan. And then the drasha is there's no Tosefet Shabbat D'Oraita, so there's no Tosefet Shvi D'Oraita. Now Zev might be implying, what about Tosefet Shvi D'Rabbanan? Hold on. That's number 1. Number 2, the Tosefet isn't, when we say Tosefet Shabbat, we don't mean you have to add any more time. What we mean is you have to make sure that you don't transgress Shabbat. And that means stop 5 minutes before Shkia. Why? Because otherwise, who knows exactly when Shkia is? Now, the same would apply to Shemitah too, right? Because Shemitah starts when? On Rosh Hashanah. So, yes, you should stop working your field 5 minutes before Rosh Hashanah as well. Now you have 2 reasons to do it, for Rosh Hashanah and for Shemitah. But that's not a reason to stop already on Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? I'll just read this in the rush for a moment. Hiksha Raivid, on the parallel Gemara to this Yerushalmi in the Bavli, so we see there is Tosefet Shabbat as well. ותרץ, די תוספת שמוסיפים לכל הקודש אינו אלא בין השמשות שלהן שהוא אסור. צריך להפסיק מעט קודם בין השמשות כדי שלא ייכנס לבית הספק. אבל מן הוודאי ושלא מחמת הספק, לא אסרינן לה. So the reason you need to stop before Shabbat is just to make sure that you don't mechalel Shabbat. It's not that you need to stop before Shabbat in order to avoid, because preparation for Shabbat, right? All right. Third option I want to propose follows the idea of the difference between, right? We asked, is there a hekesh between Shabbat and Shemitah when it comes to Tosefet Shabbat? Right? What's the Gemara saying? The Gemara is saying, Sheshet Yomim Ta'avod V'asit Kol Malachtecha is parallel to Shesh Shanim Tizra Sadecha, right? Now, we say, is that true? Yes. What do we mean? What we mean is, when we say Tosefet Shvit, let's start the other way. It's easier to understand the other way. When we say Tosefet Shvit, what do we mean? We mean you're not allowed to do things that prepare your land to work on Shvit, even if you won't work. That's what Tosefet Shvit means. Is there such an Isra on Shabbat? only according to Beit Shammai, right? Now you'll say, wait, but you have to stop an hour before Shabbos. You have to start whatever, half an hour before Shabbos starts, right? Right. But am I allowed to run my Shabbos, to set my Shabbos clock? The answer is yes. So too, I'm allowed to do melachot that prepare. So when you talk about the shnei prakim rishonim, we don't mean the time that you have to add to Tosefet Shvi'it, because there was never such an isur. There was never a thought of an obligation that 6 hours before Shemitah you have to stop everything because Shemitah is coming. What you have to stop is 6 months before, or 3 months before, or a month before, doing whatever it is that prepares your land for the Shemitah. In that sense, Shemitah and Shabbat remain the same. In other words, Shabbat does have the Tosefet in the sense you have to add time to Shabbat, but Shabbat doesn't have the Tosefet in the sense that you're not allowed to prepare for Shabbat. That's what we called the Shvitat Kelim model. The Shvitat Kelim model doesn't apply to Shabbat, to Shemitah, to Shabbat. So too, it doesn't apply to Shemitah. Those are the three suggestions I want to suggest about that parallel. The one small issue that I'm sure Zev would have with this is that the Yerushalmi seems to say Shesh Shanim, right? Shesh Shanim Tavalos Tikon Rachtecha is learned from the fact that the entirety of the 6 days can be used, right? Which implies that the Tosefet we're canceling is the Tosefet that allows you to work for the full 6 days. In terms of the wording, in terms of conceptually, there's a difference in Tosefet Shabbat and Tosefet Shvi'it. In terms of the wording of the Gemara, I don't know how convincing that is. That's the truth. Beseder. So let's see the Bavli. The Bavli there's a parallel Gemara Bayasmot, Katan Daf Gimel. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rabban Gamliel Uvedino Midoraita Bati Lehu. So they themselves cancelled it Midoraita. So first they say Gamar Maitama. How did this happen? What's the reasoning? Gamar Shabbat Mishabbat Bereshit Malani Yasura Lefanav Acharas Mutari Nefkan Yasura Lefanav Achara Mutari. Fine. Same limud, right? There's the same limud. I like the Yerushalmi that explicates the exact limud, but beseder. The idea is the same. Matkif la Ravashi. Ravashi asked the same question that we said Be'al Peh. We actually said the Yerushalmi kind of pointed it out before. Mandam al hilchata tegzara shava akra lehilchata. Mandam akra tegzara shava akra kra. Hooray. There's a machloket, we said, between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. How do we know there's a chiyuv of Tosefet Shvi'it? So, miman afshach, if it's halakha l'Moshe Sinai, so by what right do we cancel halakha l'Moshe Sinai? And if it's a pasuk, so by what right do we change the limud in the pasuk? Right? The Yerushalmi says we had one limud in the pasuk, and you change it to a different limud in the pasuk, right? And he says again, by what right? Right? By what right are you playing around with the limudim? Right? That's beseder. So the Yerushalmi answers. So the Bavli answers. This is based on the Halakha l'Moshe Sinai. Damar bi'asi amar bi'Yochanan Shum Rabbi Nachman ish bikat beit Chultan esor natiot arava v'nisuch hamayim Halakha l'Moshe Sinai. And therefore, what? I'm just going to read the next part. So the three halachot l'Moshe Sinai that come together, esor natiot arava nisuch hamayim. אמר רבשי, רבן גמליאל ובית דינו, סברי לה כרבי ישמעאל דאמר הלכתה גמירי לה, וכי גמירי הלכתה בזמן שבית המקדש קיים, דומיה דניסוך המים, אבל בזמן שאין בית המקדש קיים, לא. So let's have a look at these three halachot l'Moshe Sinai and explain what the Gemara says. Halachot l'Moshe Sinai number one is that when you have a field in which you have 10 young saplings, you're allowed to plow the field for the saplings' sake during Tosefet Shvi'it. In order to say that sentence, you have to assume there's such a thing called Isur of Tosefet Shvi'it, right? If there's no Isur of Tosefet Shvi'it, there won't be, you don't need the heter to plow that field for the saplings. That's Esor Natiot. Arava is that on Sukkot, they take aravot and put them around the Mizbeach. That would be, right, Hakafat aravot. What we do on Shmini Atzeret, on Hoshana Rabbah, thank you, is zecher to what they used to do in the Mikdash. It's similar, but it's not quite. And they used to stand aravot up, and through the aravot, plead for the water for the oncoming rain. And the other side of that was Nisuch HaMayim. Why is Nisuch HaMayim done davka on Sukkot? Nisuch HaMayim is done, that right, Nisuch HaMayim is all year round, you bring different offerings. Generally, when you come to liquids that you bring to the Mikdash, you bring wine to Menasech, and you bring oil as part of a mincha. Right, part of the korban, you're supposed to also bring wine, usually, depending on the korban, but broadly speaking, you also bring wine as a nesech, right, as an offering together with your korban. You bring oils for most menachot, going with your menachot, right, with the menachot. Now, once a year you bring water. When is that? During Sukkot. Why do you offer up water during Sukkot specifically? The reason you offer water up during Sukkot specifically is because Sukkot is the time at which you have the least amount of water, right? During the whole year, right? During the winter, it's raining, so you have water. And then comes March, April, the rain stops, pretty much, definitely in Israel, right? Rain, you'll have 2 days of rain between April and September, right? You have 2 days of rain roughly in Israel. But apart from that, right, you have nothing, right? Come September, you're at your lowest point, right? So that's when you take the last bit of rain that you have in your wells, and you offer that up and say, I trust Hashem to give us new water in the new season, in the upcoming season. Together with Arbat Aminim, together with Hakafat Aravot. So when I talk about, so what the Gemara says, first we'll read the Pshat, and then we'll say what the deeper meaning that I understand here. The Pshat of the Gemara says, these three halachot l'Moshe Sinai come together, were given together. There are many other halachot l'Moshe Sinai, but these three were given together, and therefore they all have, there's a common denominator between these three. Nisuch HaMayim, Arava, and Esel Natiyot. What's the common denominator? The Mikdash. If you don't have the Mikdash, you're not allowed to offer up water. You can only do that in the Mikdash, obviously. The Arava, not what we do on Hoshana Rabbah, but what they did around the Mizbeach can only be done around the Mizbeach, therefore only when you have a Mikdash. And the Esel Natiyot obviously also only applies when there's a Mikdash. Which raises an important question, why is that so obvious? Why should the halacha of Tosefet Shvi'it only apply when there's a mikdash? I understand the Arava Nisuch HaMayim makes perfect sense, because you don't have mikdash, you don't have a mizbech, you don't have where to offer up your water. But what does Esel Natiyot have anything to do with Arava Nisuch HaMayim? So maybe we have to start from somewhere else. And this is not written here because there's my own chidush, and they try to write the gadol. The agreement we have is that what I write in the pages is things that we can all pretty much agree on, and my own chidushim I give in the shiur and we upload to the website. So here's my thought. Maybe I'm thinking about the wrong common denominator. When I offer up the water, what am I doing? Right, the supplication. I'm saying I trust Hashem. I have such a relationship with Hashem that allows me to pour the last of my water and offer that up to Hashem before the new rain season comes, right? And I can do this. The extent of emunah required to do such a thing necessitates a mikdash. Without a mikdash, I can't be expected to have such high level of emunah. Parallel thing happens in Arava. The kind of supplication we have in that context, where you have a mikdash and you're doing this kind of thing, this kind of ceremony, I'd say, right, of the Aravot, that symbolizes the coming of the new rain, of a nachal, that the nechalim will fill up again. I'd go so far as to say, maybe this part shouldn't be recorded either, but I'd almost say that it starts to look like almost like avodah zarah, right? Unless it's on the mikdash. So that's something, right? It's not about the minim; it's a different thing. It's only done in the Mikdash, and it's the kind of request for water and trust that we're doing Ratzon Hashem that can only be done in the Mikdash. So maybe the common denominator between these two, at least the Nisuch HaMayim and the Arava, has more to do with the supplication regarding the Mikdash than it has to do with the Mikdash is secondary. The Mikdash is a prerequisite not on the technical level of, well, you need a mizbech to put the aravot around, and you need a mizbech to put the water. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is, without the Mikdash, you're not close enough. Your relationship with Hashem isn't close enough to justify doing such things. And then it all depends on how your relationship with Hashem is going. The Mikdash symbolizes that, and I'd say demonstrates that, right? The Mikdash's existence is demonstrative of your relationship with Hashem. And then there are certain things you do only if you have a Mikdash, and certain things that you don't do if you don't have a Mikdash. For example, we're going to be abandoning our fields for a full year. So what do we want to do right before we abandon our fields? Everything we can. Do anything we can, right? What do you do before Shabbos? Every Shabbos. What do you do before Shabbos? Did you set the light right? Did you set the Shabbos clock? Did you make sure the urn is running like this on the Shabbos setting? You do all the Shabbos settings on everything, right? We do everything till the last minute. Now, so it take 40 minutes before, but point is, right, we're rushing around to make sure that everything is ready for Shabbos so that the Shabbos could run itself. And that's the same thing we'd want to do right before Shemitah comes. Right, to do as much as we can to prepare the land, not to prepare the home, to prepare the land for Shemitah. In order to do that, you have to have a certain trust in Hashem that you're going to abandon your fields, but you're going to get everything you need over the following year. And that's very much not to be taken for granted. Sorry, my goodness, so annoying. Resume. In that sense, Nisuch HaMayim has more to do with my trusting Hashem that I can give up my last water. Arava has more to do with my relationship with Hashem, trusting that He'll give us, right? And abandoning the field before Shemitah. Remember, we talked about Yom Kippur, right? We said Tosefet Yom Kippur, the Havamina about Tosefet Yom Kippur would have been to stop eating 6 hours before the fast starts, right? Right, there are twice a year that we come to Ma'ariv feeling bloated, right? Twice a year we come to Ma'ariv feeling bloated. Once was this week, and once is going to be in 2 months, right? Once is late to Shabbat, right? We all had a big Sudash L'Shet, right? We came to Ma'ariv feeling, right? And Yom Kippur, the rest of the year, maybe you'll eat before, but not feel bloated, right? So we would have thought that the right way to do Yom Kippur is to start fasting earlier. That's in essence what we do on Shemitah, right? On Shemitah, we do that. We stop everything so that the land won't create more during Shemitah. Now the question is, do we need the land to create during Shemitah? Of course we do. We need the land to create during Shemitah because we have to have what to eat. Torah doesn't say don't eat anything. The Torah says don't work to create anything. And also, I want you to depend on this miracle to not even prepare the land for that. Can we be expected to depend on that miracle only when we have that kind of relationship with Beit HaMikdash? And I think that's the common denominator Eser Natiot Arava and Nisuch HaMayim have with each other. And that's why all three only occur if Beit HaMikdash is still standing, not nowadays when we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. You can find this. I just wrote this up for this week's Chamdat Yamim. I started writing for the Eretz Chamda weekly publication. I started writing a weekly column there. So what I said just now is what I wrote there. Just that point about this, the trusting Hashem. So, let's see the Rambam. The Rambam says, Avodat Haaretz b'shana shishit. עבודת הארץ בשנה שישית, 30 יום סמוך לשביעית, אסורה, הלכה למשה מסיני, מפני שהוא מתקנה לשביעית. דבר זה, בזמן שבית המקדש קיים, הוא שנאסר מפי השמועה. So the Rambam, right, holds ההלכה, that nowadays there's no תוספת שביעית at all. I do want to use this to address, since Zev wrote that my chidush is nice, so maybe you'll also accept an answer to a previous question that's implied here, right? The Sma says, could we keep Shemitah midrabanan at all? It's not so clear that the bracha, right? We're going to, the following unit will discuss whether Shemitah is doraita or drabanan, right? The following unit will discuss whether Shemitah nowadays is doraita or drabanan. We're talking about Tosefet Shvi'it, which is fully canceled. So the Sma says, L'chora, when the Torah promises its bracha, it says, if you keep Shemitah, so you'll receive the bracha. Question, if we hold that Shemitah is drabanan, are any of us going to be keeping Shemitah next year? Says the Sma, we won't. Because it's not Shemitah. Now, Beseder, drabanan level, you're creating a new thing, drabanan level, but it's not Shemitah. So what justifies Chazal, he asks, what justifies Chazal to bichlal create such a strong prohibition that says, don't, like keep Shemitah, don't work your fields, in a way that's much worse than the Torah. The Torah says, don't work your fields, but you'll get a bracha. Chazal don't have the power to promise a bracha. They can only say, don't work your fields. So that's a gzera that's much harsher than the Torah one, right? Chazon Ish says, lo nachon. Chazon Ish says, disagrees, and in the end, we do keep, don't worry, we do keep Shemitah Drabanan. From what you were worried there, we do keep Shemitah Drabanan. But I do think that there's a difference between when we're going to metaken, when we say the takanav Shemitah says the trees will still bear, the trees will give their fruit, the vegetables is our whole issue unto themselves. But that whole system will continue working. But that works only for the Shemitah itself. The Tosefet Shvi'it that says don't even prepare. That's something that, as I said, isn't fair to request, to not even prepare for Shemitah. And that's why Chazal don't impose that at all when there's no Beit Mikdash. I want to go back to the Yerushalmi, right? I want to go back to the Yerushalmi and address the Bavli says that all depends on the relationship between these three, which depends on the Beit Mikdash. The Yerushalmi says, no, we have a new limud. Yerushalmi, tomorrow we can build Beit Mikdash. We can build Beit Mikdash tomorrow. According to the Bavli, we'll have to keep Tosefet Shvi'it right away. And according to Yerushalmi, we won't, because Yerushalmi says, no, we have a limud. But once again, the question is, how can it be the first Beit Din says one pasuk, the second Beit Din says, no, a different pasuk? How do you do such a thing? Says the Alei Tamar, a tremendous chidush, says like this. יבואר על פי דברי הריטב"א בראש השנה, וזה לשונו. כל מה שיש לו אסמכתא מן הפסוק, העיר הקדוש ברוך הוא שראוי לעשות כך. העיר הקדוש ברוך הוא. Astonishing verbiage there. אלא שלא קבעו חובה, ומסרו לחכמים, וזה דבר ברור ואמת. אבל התורה העירה בכך, ומסרה חיוב הדבר, לחכמים לקובעו אם ירצו, כמו שכתוב על פי התורה אשר יורוך. Astonishing. The Rambam, we usually, when we learn the word asmachta. Usually we think of the word asmachta the way the Rambam explains the word asmachta. How does the Rambam explain the word asmachta? The Rambam says it's a word play, right? In other words, the pasuk says one thing, but it's useful to read the pasuk differently because that way you'll remember the halachot better, you'll understand the halachot better, you'll connect them better with the Torah. That's all great. So the Rambam, that's the way we usually learn asmachta. What does asmachta usually mean? It means something that's not doraita at all. The Torah, right, there is no intention to keep this midoraita. Chazal created something new and they samchu ala pasuk. They played a word game in the pasuk. They played right? They played around with the pasuk to make it sound like there's another isur here, chiyuv here, but really it's not a real thing. That's how the way we usually learn the term asmachta. That's what the Rambam says, and usually that's the way we learn. The Ritva says that Tamar says differently. Ritva says, do you think Kadosh Baruch Hu does not know how to play with his own psukim? Of course he does. If we can think of word games, Kadosh Baruch Hu is the one who created the word games, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be able to think of them, right? Kadosh Baruch Hu created our minds, so he's also aware of all the different ways we can read the pasuk. All the different drashot we can make. Now, there's a problem, because there can't in language not be a way of writing the Torah that won't also contain contradictions, different directions. And when I say contradictions, different directions, I mean, if you're willing to play word games, you can always create contradictions. You can always create, right, you'll always be able to find things that don't necessarily fit with other things, right? So what do you do with that? So says the Ritva, there are two kinds of ways to learn psukim in general. Kadosh Baruch Hu is aware of both ways, and he purposely chose both ways. One way is the way that's mechuyav, the way that you have to read the pasuk. Don't play around with it. There's no way of playing around the pasuk, right? What we like to say, lo tirtzach, mo, tinaf, right? That's right. To start putting exclamation points and to start putting all kinds of different ways. That's not a legitimate way of reading the pasuk at all, right? There's only one, right? But although even that, there is I think the Yerushalmi in certain places Dafka does learn there are situations in which the right thing to do is to kill. So you could read the pasuk as saying that sometimes you do kill. So yeah, it'll only apply in those cases. Generally, lo tirtzach, and sometimes yes, tirtzach. But the Ritva says there's the way you have to read the pasuk, and then there are the word games. And the word games, Kadosh Baruch Hu left the Chazal to figure out. Now, does that mean they're drabanan? No, they're still doraita, because Kadosh Baruch Hu said them. But Kadosh Baruch Hu implies, listen, there's another truth here. There's another truth here. So it says b'chalisha v'katzir tishbot. One truth we can tease out of that is the truth of Tosefet Shvi'it. There's another opposing truth that we can tease out of that, which is, not out of that, out of the hekesh between Shesh Yamim Ta'avod Hazikor Machtecha and Shesh Yamim Tizra Sadecha, right? That hekesh, that way of reading the pasuk that says six meaning a full six. Now, you mean a full six? That's up to Chachamim to decide. So it's not that the first Beit Din made a mistake. The Yerushalmi's the problem was, you're saying the first Beit Din learned, right, let's go back to reading this in the Yerushalmi. The second Beit Din, hetiru beisur shnei pakim harishonim. Rabbi Yochanan says, what do you mean? So they canceled what the previous Beit Din said. He said, no. B'shah she'asur lemikra samchu. What does that mean? They're both aware that the limud is a choice, is their choice. The first Beit Din chose to learn the first limud, and the second Beit Din chose to learn the second limud. They didn't cancel. They say both are legitimate, and now you have to decide and choose. And the first one chose to learn the first limud, the second one chose to learn the second limud, because they're both there. This touches upon the way we learn Torah in general, we being the Brisker world, and maybe even more strongly the Rav Lichtenstein world, right? The theological backing, and I want to take a moment to talk about the theological backing of the whole Brisk world, or at least the Rav Lichtenstein world, within Brisk, and the Rav Blumenzweig, even more strongly the Rav Blumenzweig world that I come from. This affected my learning very strongly. I only know to say that it's my B'tei Midrash. You might tell me, yeah, it's also this Rav, it's also that Rav. So I'm just saying, Rav Blumenzweig definitely very, very strongly holds by this. I also think the Rav Nazir in Merkaz also believed in this way of learning. When you have a Machloked Rishonim, or Machloket Tanaim, Machloket Amorim. What does that mean? It means that in Kadosh Baruch Hu's world, there are many different truths. When they come down to our world, unfortunately, we can only keep one. So here are two opposing truths. One truth says, Tosefet Shvi'it. The other truth says, Shesh Shanim Tizra Sadecha. Right? So which is the right truth? The answer is, there is a truth in both of them. In Hashem's world, there are both truths. How do you apply them into the world? Good question. So then, what will end up happening is that Abaye will say, this truth trumps that truth, and the Rava will say, this truth trumps the other truth. And then what do we do, Lemaise? Well, we'll say halacha like Rava, because that's what we do, and you have Machloket Abaye and Rava. But that's the way the system works, right? The way the system works is not that Abaye says, Rava is saying nonsense, and Rava says Abaye is saying nonsense. He's just saying there are different truths, and the question was, in the world of application, which one will trump? And in the world of application, Abaye says this, Rava says that, we hold like Rava, right? The Shulchan Aruch says this, the Ramah says that, and we'll hold like the Ramah. So, Lemaise, in our limited world, we have to choose one, right? Do we do the Tosefet Shvi'it or do we not do the Tosefet Shvi'it? We have to choose one. We can't do both. We can't. Physically, we can't do both. We have to choose one. Where do we encompass Hashem's world? Where does that reflect itself? So you'll say, well, Shatad Chak, where you have another suffix, all those things. It's all true. But where do we most strongly encompass both truths? In the Beit Midrash. The Beit Midrash is where we hold on to both truths. See how that works? Because when we're sitting here and we're learning both sides, Lemaise, what I'm going to write when I write my halachic piece about how to keep Tosefet Shvi'it, I'm going to say, well, we canceled Tosefet Shvi'it. So what people who aren't in the Beit Midrash are going to know, oh, it was canceled. So as far as they're concerned, it never existed. When we learn the Yerushalmi, we say, wow, there is a truth to B'chalish v'chatzad Shbot, and there's another truth which is Sheshlim Ta'avod. And we can hold both in our heads and understand what's the Svar. And that's why we work so hard understanding, right, when you say, what is Rava's Svar? What is Abaye's Svar? What do you mean? Why is that such an important thing? Because there is a truth in Hashem's world. And as the Ritva says, sometimes Hashem alludes to it in the Pasuk itself. He alludes to opposing things, not because he wasn't careful, not because he didn't pay attention, not because we're reading the Pasuk in ways that he never imagined that we'd read them. No, he knew everything. He still knows everything. He gave us the psukim in such a way that we could read them in both ways so that we'll know that there's a truth behind each of these. And that's what we're doing. And that's why the Davka, the learning of the Beit Midrash, in a way, is much more important often, rather than keeping. That's why I often joke that I'm not a halacha person. Halacha, halacha, keep halacha. But what interests me is not the halacha, it's the Beit Midrash. And the reason for that is this, because I want to know all of the truth. Knowing halacha doesn't give you all the truth. Knowing halacha knows the application that you could do in our world. But to get the full picture of the truth, you need also those things, in the Ritva's word, Kadosh Baruch Hu he'ira lehem shira'ui la'asot kach. What does that mean, he'ira lehem shira'ui la'asot kach? Meaning, there is a truth behind this in Hashem's world. So Hashem implies that there's another truth going on here. Now, will you accept that truth? Well, you can't always, because there'll be opposing truths. Because Baruch Hu is hinting, is alluding that, just so you know, there's a truth behind that too. Sometimes it'll be up to the Batei Din to decide if yes or no, and sometimes it'll be very clear what we have to do in application, but we'll still have the Beit Midrash to keep the other truth as part of this world. The only place Beit Shammai's truths, and Beit Shammai has many truths. Everything Beit Shammai says is true. It just opposes another truth, which is Beit Hilal's truth, so it doesn't allow us to apply Beit Shammai's truth. But Beit Shammai are kept alive only in Beit Midrash, and that's why you come to the Beit Midrash, to keep Beit Shammai's truth alive. Beit Hilal's truth, the halacha lemaisa, we don't need the Beit Midrash for that. We keep that lemaisa, so we don't need the Beit Midrash for that, right? But the most important part of the Beit Midrash is learning Beit Shammai's truth and keeping that alive. And the same goes And that's what the astonishing pasuk he brings al pi Torah shel Yerucha. There are three ways of learning al pi Torah shel Yerucha. Number one is Chazal make up their own halachot. In other words, Chazal say, well, we need muktzah. It's something that just without muktzah, it's hard to keep Shabbos. So do muktzah. So that'll be a pi Torah shel Yerucha. That's what you call drabana. Another way is, when you're not sure what the halacha is, go and ask the Rav. And then a pi Torah shel Yerucha. And then you have halachot of when you're allowed to ask another Rav, what Beit Din has the right to trump a different Rav and different Beit Din, etc., etc., etc. The Ritva is saying a third option. The Torah. There are different truths in Torah, and Chazal have the right to choose which one will be applied here. Even though they know of they're aware of the others. But they have the right to choose which one. And that's the way the Alei Tamar learns the Yerushalmi. I think it's a phenomenal limud. And of course, I also use that as a springboard to our Ben Azmanim that we're going to start now. Just to keep you guys wanting to, and those who missed the shiur and will listen on the YouTube or the website, we'll have incentive to not only keep the halachot that I'm sending out about Shemitah and Tosefet Shvi'it, but also to come back to the Beit Midrash right after this break we're going to have now. So I hope I managed to give a bit of a chizuk on that front as well.